Welcome to yet another HSRCA lunch chat. We're delighted, of course, to have Bill Buckle here, and Bob Williamson's going to talk as well about the wonderful world of Buckle cars. And I don't think I've got anything much to waffle on about, so we'll try and get the Bob and Bill show underway. Late starter here, Richard Cardew coming in the door. If you like to wander up.
Where's Bob?
Bob's here, and Bill's here.
Bill's the younger one.
Bill's the younger one. Let's have an HSRCA welcome to Bill. Good to see you.
Cheers for you, Bill. You want to know? When Gary originally asked me...
Closer,
right?
Thank you.
Took my ice cream, like that.
That's it.
When Gary originally asked me to come and do this, I said, oh, no way, because my life's all over in 10 minutes on the screen and talk about. So I said, I'll do it if we'll have Bill along. And he said, great idea. So that's where he got the idea of the Bill and Bob show. So basically, people who don't know me, I grew up in Lake Hember all my life, until I was 21. Worked at Leyland, out of the factory area, out at Zetland. Went in, opened up the mini factory. Then I moved from there onto a car yard I bought on Canterbury Road at Bankstown, and moved factory a couple of times and started up in the Mustang business. I had 13 race cars altogether in my life. Had 3 Buckles, one I've still got, which I've had for 56 years. The Minis, I ran 2 at Bathurst in the 1000, and I ran a rotary Mazda where Gary Cook in another 1000 race. Basically, that's all the motor racing I did, other than Easter meetings and Audioran Parks and hill climbs in the first 2 Buckles, which one was the yellow one that Bill owned, originally built for himself. What else can I say? As I said, that's about basically my life. We're here to interview Bill, and I'll hand you over to him, and he can start the ball rolling. Yeah, mate.
Bob, I'm not quite sure how I say thank you, but I think I got conned.
What's new
You
on
said there might be a few people who want to listen to what you've got to talk about. In the half an hour I've been downstairs, I've met at least 4 or 5 people who would have been able to have a better conversation about motorsport in general than what I can do. So I'm not sure where you want me to start. Are you going to ask me questions or
Well, they can ask you the questions. You just tell us how it all started.
Okay.
How did it start, Bill?
I'm sorry, say again?
How did it start? How did you start off?
I was born. I was born in 1926. Yeah, I can go back a bit. In fact, my wife said to me, you never talk about your father when you do talks, and I should. Dad was in the First World War, and he was gassed in France, which is not a very nice thing. He survived that, and then started a motor business in Sydney, took on, well, Alcar in Melbourne originally, but I think he only did that for a year and realised the frogs couldn't make proper cars, and he got the Triumph franchise and brought it to Sydney. And the little Triumph Super 7 was a very clever little car. I've been talking about to the guys coming here today. It had a three-bearing crankshaft, whereas an Austin 7 had a 2-bearing crankshaft. You couldn't rev them. Well, I think they finished up revving them, and it also had 4-wheel hydraulic brakes. Triumph did. Austin had 2-wheel mechanical brakes on the rear wheel. Anyway, it was a great little car, and Dad did a lot of reliability trials and then finished up doing the Sydney to Melbourne and had the light car record in 13 1/4 hours. on dirt road in and out to gum trees. And if you think about it, that's still pretty bloody quick. You know, these days you can probably do it in 10 hours down a freeway with no traffic lights. So 13 and a quarter hours in a 7 horsepower thing that probably had 6 or 8 punctures on the way was pretty clever.
What year was that?
1928.
1928.
Yeah. We've still got the, well, Castrol trophy that he won. Well, I haven't got the trophy, I've got a good photo of it. And a nice presentation from Triumph Motor Company in England, celebrating that record. Anyway, that's a bit about that. Then his franchise got bigger and better. He took on Talbot, and they had some lovely old cars, or lovely cars at the time. Then Armstrong Siddeley, which was okay. The cars were quite nice, but they were up against Jaguar. Then DeSoto, then variously that company in William Street took on Citroën, then a lot of other unusual brands. I won't bore you with all that. So I guess, you know, that's how I started with an interest in cars. And Dad's riding mechanic and his service manager came home from the Second World War and saw that I had an interest. And he said, I've got a little Triumph chassis down in the house, under the house in Avalon. Do you want that? I said, yes, please. So I finished up making that into a pretty nice little car. So that's how my motorsport probably got started. In fact, I think the franchise was being let go and all the spare parts were going to be sold to a mob in Redfern. Dad said, why don't you go into the spare parts department and get all the bits you need? And one of them was a little Cosette supercharger. So I put that on the car and blew away the J-type MG, which was supposed to be a pretty good little car. Anyway, that's a bit about the beginnings of the whole thing. Ask me some more questions.
Well, let's get on to this Citroën Special.
Get the microphone.
The Citroën Special, you and Charlie Buck started?
Yeah, okay. One of the franchises we took on was Citroën, and I started doing some hill climbs and a bit of airstrip racing, and then did a Bathurst in the Citroën Light 15, which was a pretty clever car. In fact, I finished up putting a seat belt in it so I could stay in the driver's side instead of finishing up on the passenger's side. But they were clever the way they went round corners and pretty safe. So that's really how I got into a bit of motor racing with Citroën. The only car that could beat it around Bathurst was a 6-cylinder Citroën that came up from Melbourne, and you couldn't stay with that. What else am I talking about now?
The Citroën Special.
Oh, yes. Okay, we saw Charlie Buck was a schoolmate of mine, and perhaps some of you know who he is, but he was very instrumental in getting the Buckle Coupe on the road. But Charlie and I bought a wrecked Citroën and used the mechanical bits of it to make an open wheeler. So it had a front cross member that was the engine mount as well as the basis for the front suspension, which was torsion bar, and the rear axle was another piece of tube with trailing arms behind it, also torsion bar, and we joined up the front and rear cross member. We took them out of this wreck, a couple of tubes, and then Les Wright bought it. Is that right, Les?
Another Wright.
No, another Wright.
Another one.
Don Wright.
Don Wright. Don Wright. Shit, I am getting old, I'm sorry. Sorry, madam. Okay. Anyway, then I had the opportunity to go to England, and I needed money, so I sold that chassis to Don Wright. And it became quite a successful little car.
Yeah, Mr. Wright.
Mr. Wright, yes, not Mr. Wrong. So after that, I really had to get on with making some money, I suppose. So I didn't get very involved with that car, but it became quite a successful car. Okay, that's that car.
How about we talk about why you went to England and came up with the idea of making fiberglass cars here in Australia? Whiny, mate.
Okay. I went to England. Of course, you've got to have a car, so I got a home delivery Citroen Big 15, longer wheelbase, and a pretty handy thing to get around Europe in. At that time, Sterling Moss, Mike Hawthorne, Peter Collins were the stars in whatever was Formula One in those days, I suppose. And I followed a lot of the motor racing around Europe. Did quite a few rallies over there, also with a Citroen, because I learned about the people who had the Citroen franchise in Vauxhall Bridge Road in London, and became quite friendly with the son of the guy that did all that. So we did quite a bit of that sort of rallying. I had to actually give a speech, now that I remember, at the London Motor Club, and who was the speaker in front of me? Sterling Moss. You know, who was Bill Buckle? Nobody compared to Sterling, but nice man. So that's how that car started. Next question.
You got the idea of doing fiberglass, so you went off to Germany and organised that for the Goggo. No. Yep. Well,
You're getting out of context, or out of time. Yeah, I went to the Earl's Court Motor Show and saw a couple of fiberglass bodied sports cars. I thought, geez, I can do better than that. I didn't think they were that clever or that good looking. So came back to Australia. I've got to try and keep this in context. That would have been, because I came back because of the Red X trial. Somebody, 53. Yes, a guy called, doesn't matter who, rang me and said, you've been pretty good at driving Citroens in rallies. Do you want to come out and drive in the Round Australia Red X trial? I said, yeah, bloody hell. So I came back and I got in that car and I said, you've made it too heavy, you've got all those spare wheels on the roof, you're going to put 3 people in it instead of 2. It's going to be too heavy, and sure enough it was. This guy was a good driver, Laurie Whitehead, drove it into the ground and we got about halfway around, I think, then it gave up. So I went the next year just with a mate of mine, Bill Chipway, and we got a bit further, but then trying to pass someone in the dark and in the dust. There were 3 or 4 rocks across the road and I picked the smallest one, but it was still a bit too big. So it tore the front suspension out of it. Oh. Anyway, that's my Red X trial. But Citroens were a wonderful motor car, very clever design. What's next, Bob? Oh yeah, at the Earl's Court Motor Show I'd seen some fiberglass specials. So, about the same time, I said to the people who were then running Buckle Motors, because by that time my father had passed away because of his wartime injuries, I think I can build a sports car that might go okay in Australia. The opposition, or the competition then was things like MGs, which were okay, but motors were a bit small. So the guy who was running the company then said, well, you know, why don't we think about a bigger motor and a lightweight car? So that's how the Buckle started. A guy called Charles Buck, with whom I went to school, was available, and we built a prototype. You might have seen one of them, the blue one, which wasn't bad looking, but we did a lot of miles in that and found out a lot about chassis. I also met Ron Toranak at various hill climbs, and he was a very switched on motor designer, and the little cars he made were very clever. He knew how to make suspensions and that sort of stuff. So I got Ron involved, and we built a ladder type chassis and did a lot of miles in that car to prove the chassis and prove that we could actually make fiberglass, because nobody knew much about fiberglass. There were not even very many boat builders in those days. And the suppliers of the glass and the resin, separate, used to come out to the factory and say, "Is that what you do with that stuff? You get that funny looking Mac stuff, and you've got to cut it into, and you put it in there, and then you put this other stuff on it. That is what you do." You know, they sold the other stuff, they didn't really know what you were meant to do with it. Anyway, it was early days of that, and somehow we got it pretty right. And that car, that prototype, is now in Germany, and it looks better than it ever did when we had it. The guy absolutely loves it, so he's got quite a lot of old cars. Anyway, then we decided to get seriously into it, made a completely new design, which was a full coupe, but then try to make cars in Australia. In these days, I think Campbell Bolwell has made a brilliant modern motor car, but I'm not quite sure how you sell that against Ferrari and Lamborghini and that sort of thing. Anyway, we sold 20, and then it was time to get on and do something else, I think. Start me again.
Well, out of the 20 you built, I think there's only one that never raced in any competition, so I think that's a good record. And then you went on from there. You went into driving sedans for the Toyota dealer team. Do you want to get into that?
Yeah, it's not that interesting, but
but
you know, I suppose I wasn't a bad peddler, and I took on Toyota because I saw a Toyota Crown at the '63 Motor Show, and I said that mob will lead the world in 10 years. I wasn't quite right, but in 20 years I was very right, and they did, and they still know how to make cars. But coming back to the Toyota thing, they asked me to go down to Calder, and because they know I'd done a bit of motor racing, and they had all the young hotshots down there who either went a bit too hard or broke the cars or something. So I got a job in the Toyota race team, which was good fun. Then when I decided I was getting a bit old and I needed to get on with life and try and make some money, I nominated Bob Morris, because Ray Morris, his father, was a good mate, and young Bob was a switched-on young guy and turned out to be a bloody good driver. So that was, I guess I started Bob. So that's the driver part of it.
When you mentioned Bob Morris, is that how he got into Holdens with Ron Hodson? Because you had a very big link with Ron Hodson.
Yeah.
So, would you started him off driving for Ron Hodson?
I think it was just a natural progression. Bob had proved himself, was pretty good. Yeah, okay. Then I should perhaps go back to Buckle Motors. That business, well, I was stuck out in the factory at Punchbowl trying to make cars. The guys who Dad said when he died should run the place did a good job for a while, but then got a bit too clever and spent too much time at the automobile club. I probably shouldn't say that. and late lunches and all that. And although I was a director, I was meant to be out at Punchbowl most of the time. Anyway, finally, that company got sold. But hang on, before that, Buckle Motors only had expensive franchises like Armstrong, Siddeley, DeSoto, Citroën, Bourgeois, etc. And what?
Hands up.
Oh yeah, whatever. No, nobody knows what a Hansa is. Bourgeois Hansa, actually, it was. Then Goliath, Lloyd, quite a few. But we needed a small, cheap car. The economy had gone down a bit. They probably had I was going to say a Scott Morrison, but I better not say that. And we needed a small, cheap car. There was a company called Tozer, Kemsley and Milbourne in England who used to liaise between the factories and dealers all over the world. And they got the message that we needed a small car, and they said, come and have a look at Goggomobile. G-O-G-G-O. So I went off to Bavaria with not the faintest idea of German, and hardly anybody in country Bavaria spoke English, but somehow, well, I bought a little Goggo and drove it in the middle of winter all over the German Alps and all that. Thought it was a clever little thing. And somehow we got the franchise. I convinced them that if they sold me the mechanical bits, I could make the bodies in fiberglass, not realising what a big call that was. Anyway, we finished up doing it and we made hundreds of Goggomobiles. Then I designed a little thing called the Dart, which has become quite an icon with microcar nutters, Goggo nutters they're called in Australia. But, you know, Isetta and Messerschmitt and all those little things were clever little cars, but this Goggomobile was an actual little motor car with four wheels in the right place and very reliable. So that's how Goggomobile started. I'm getting a bit confused here, aren't I?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. They can put it together.
Yeah, nice and close.
Close. See, Bill's not saying he when in the grey and white buckle, which was his second one, he built. He held every record of hill climbs between Melbourne and Sydney for over 2.5 litre GT cars. But, you know, that's a pretty good defeat back in 1958, 59. And then he took off to Bathurst, and I'll let you tell it. He'll tell a little story about him and the Aston Martins. Tom Sullivan?
The Aston Martins were an orange, actually.
Orange, was it? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a group of owners, Tommy Solomon. Sorry? No, that they weren't part of Kangaroo Stable. Tony Gaze was one, and somebody else, and they went to England and got these factory Aston Martin
David Mackay.
DB3s. Mackay, yeah, that's right, Sir Malcolm. Okay. That was about the same time I designed the Goggomobile Dart. So I put a tow bar on the back of my Buckle race car, which was an ordinary production one that I used to drive to work every day, with a trailer, and put a Goggomobile Dart on it and took it up to Orange, took the tow bar off, took the trailer off, of course, took the muffler off, and finished up in between the first DB3S, which had been Le Mans car, and the other one, which was driven by Tommy Solomon, who was a pretty good handler. The Buckle had a big motor, you know, 2.8 we got on board out there, and a 3-speed Zephyr box with a Laycock overdrive, which gave beautiful ratios. At the start, Buckle just went, see you later, and only one of them got past me, so that was pretty nice.
Pretty good.
The cars have also beaten things like E-types and, well, various. So the cars were okay, and a lot of that goes to Ron Toranak and his design of the suspension, and just lightweight drum brakes, good enough, except you had to change the drums after every weekend of racing anyway, because they got little heat cracks in them. But, you know, the car did the job.
Was that the same year you drove with Jack Brabham at Orange?
No, I let Jack, or invited Jack to drive the car in one of the races.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew him through Ron Toranak. So, yeah.
You went to Orange, I think, twice, didn't you?
Well, at least twice.
Yeah, twice with the grey and white one, and I think Jack drove with you on the second year.
Maybe. Yeah.
So,
Oh, 93, give me a front. Sorry again, mate. We only have one lady, don't we? So, forgive me. Jack quite enjoyed it. I'd love to know now, I never thought about it at the time, how his lap times compared to mine. I don't know. I would think probably that he would have been, you know, maybe half a second quicker, whatever.
he was slower, just a bit, and he was further back behind cars that you beat in the first race. He was in amongst all the MGTFs and that. So I think your times were quicker than him. But he wasn't a sports car driver, was he?
I know the feeling. I know the feeling. In much later years, and this is a bit in the middle of everything, a good mate of mine got a new Porsche 911 RSR. He's Swiss, this guy, and he invited me. In those days I used to go to Europe a lot with Bob Oakley of Wild Oats fame, a great mate, and we happened to be going to the south of France in the boat that day, and he said, why don't you come and we'll go to this is this Swiss guy that had the new Porsche. We're going to be racing at a circuit called Ledanon, down in the Camargue. So we parked the boat there, went up, and he had a set of fireproof overalls and said, there you are, have a run in that. Brand new 911R RS. So he said, you go first, and you know, I'll come with you and just show you which way you get around it. So I got out there with about 20 young guns from the Porsche clubs of Europe, and I was reasonably quick, I think. Left-hand drive with, you know, a manual gearbox over here. Anyway, I didn't do any damage, and I sort of got fairly close to their times. And then I sort of started to think, shit, you know, this is $250,000 worth of car. I started to slow down a bit anyway. I said, you know, that's enough. He said, no, that's not enough. You're in the first race. Anyway, that was very enjoyable. Wonderful little motor car. He wasn't as quick as me. That's the owner, because he hadn't driven it much either. He gradually got faster and I gradually got slower, thinking about, you know, the amount of money that I was driving around. Anyway, that was just another little thing that I've done, I suppose.
I know most motor racing blokes eventually get involved in boats. Would you like to just tell us a little bit about how you started off in sailing and all that? Because this is your life, Bill. we haven't got a book to give you at the end. No. Well, I went to one with Bill at his sailing club up the North Shore somewhere, and these are all boat people. Didn't even know what a car does other than, you know, you drive it. And when he got onto the car part, a little bit at the end, well, there's more people talking about the cars than the boats. And this is a whole room full of boat people. Or we call them boats? Yachts. Sorry, yachts. Yeah. So just give us a rundown of what you did, what you started. Yeah, give us a 10-minute go. You right?
Oh, well, I'm sort of right. Like I said, I got conned today. I'm not going to talk about myself. But I've always been keen about boats. As kids, we had little dinghies with with various sorts of funny rigs in them, making them into sailing boats at Balmoral on Middle Harbour, beautiful spot. I still go down there occasionally and marvel at the fact that somehow Bob Oakley and my father knew a few of the councillors on Mossman Council, and somehow we got permission to build a Nissen hut, Nissen, which is a round, half-round thing. We bought a kit from the army, a brand new kit of panels and frames, poured a concrete slab on that beautiful end of Balmoral Beach, the southern end, and built a yacht club there, a little sailing club, inside of the Balmoral 12-foot skiff club. Anyway, I progressed, of course, to 12-foot skiffs and loved boats that went fast downwind. I better not talk too much about that. But one day we were out in that on a weekend in winter time, screaming across Middle Harbour, and a little fishing boat with a glass-windowed cockpit came up from leeward, where I couldn't see him. Short at the last minute, put this arm out to fend off, went straight through the window. Oh. That's that. The fishing boat kept going and left us with a capsized boat with its transom torn out of it until somebody else came along and dragged us into Clontarf Wharf. Then sooner or later the ambulance came while I'm hanging on to the pressure point up here because the blood was doing that. Plenty of sharks in Middle Harbour in those days. Anyway, that slowed me down a bit, and I said, thanks very much. Oh, they put 32 stitches in, including sewing up the artery. And thanks very much, I'll go home now. Well, actually you won't, you've lost a lot of blood. That set me back a fair bit. I didn't go back to work for 6 months, I think. Wow. And the first day I got back there, I put this arm down on a hot welding table and couldn't feel anything because it's still numb. That's my sailing start. Anyway, got quite involved in yachting in general and boats in general. What do you want to know about? Building a wave-piercing power cap? Oh, I built a thing called Buckle Up, which was like a 40-foot 18-footer that did 25 knots downwind, and that's a long time ago now. And we used to single ski, water ski behind it. That's a very quick boat. Well, it had asymmetric spinning with huge pole out the front. Just a super lightweight thing, which was great fun. But how many people want to know about that are here? Then I also then built a 50-foot wave-piercing catamaran that did something like 25 knots, but very much like the in-cat catamarans that are built in Hobart these days, and that's another story, but that's a huge enterprise. And those boats are all over the world now as fast ferries. Some of them, the latest ones, have turbine motors of some sort that use, I don't know what fuel does a turbine run on.
Kerosene. Kerosene.
Yeah. And they're doing 60 knots, carrying, 20 trucks and 100 cars and 300 or 400 people. That's an extraordinary enterprise. And I've been to the factory and I know, been Pete had as his nickname, the guy that runs the whole thing.
Well, I can't beat that, Bill, because I've only been on the Manly Ferry. That's about my speed in boats.
Yeah,
You right?
I'm good.
Right, what are we going to talk about next? Moving on to the motor trade, Buckle Motors, your Toyota,
Oh,
or do you want to get straight onto the Tesla? Don't start him on the Tesla.
Well, you're talking about the future of motoring.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Well, getting back onto cars, I suppose, I think I said, Toyota will lead the world. Toyota became a very big brand in Australia. We were the first dealer to deliver 150 in 1 month. That was in 1975, I think. I suppose my enthusiasm had a lot to do with that, with the staff that we had who, I don't know, I suppose they were enthused by my enthusiasm. Anyway, that company kept going pretty well, and then we took on Subaru, another very, very, very clever manufacturer. Loved the all-wheel drive. You know, I still think Subaru have got the best four-wheel drive system because of the layout of the flat motor and all that sort of stuff. Then we took on Audi. When Audi was really nowhere, became quite a big organisation. Well, Audi, of course, is part of Volkswagen now, and then we took on Volkswagen, and that now is the biggest company, biggest volume in the world, that whole complex of Volkswagen. And dare I say, they're going to be the first ones to succeed with electric cars, because they've got a huge organisation which Elon Musk didn't start with, but Volkswagen will, I think, be the leaders in what's happening with that. I'd love to be sure enough that I'm going to have the first electric Golf, but I think it's 2 years away, so who knows what's going to happen in 2 years. I've had, can I talk about Tesla?
Yeah, you can.
I went into Tesla in St Leonard's, and they didn't try to sell me a car. They just said, there it is, that's what you can have. They had the colours, put it all on the computer so you can have a look. Now, would you like to have a drive? I said, yeah, I'd love to. So I went for a drive, and they said, well, what do you think about that? I said, that is the most refined car I've ever driven. I was driving an Audi R8 at that time. The guy said, put your foot down, and he would have blown the R8 into the weeds, truly, for acceleration, instant acceleration. And I have to say that no matter what anybody thinks about Elon Musk, and I think he's a nutter, he somehow got a team together that had a design person. I've since learned his name, and I can't think of it now. But I think their design body shape is clever. The aluminium body and chassis is brilliantly done. The, what do you call it? Combination of throttle braking when you take your foot off, regenerative braking. It is such a nice thing to drive. Whether anybody here thinks that I'm right, that electricity is the future, I don't really care. How many of you don't, but I'm sure it is the future, one way or another. Of course, the infrastructure has to be organised. I've got solar panels on the roof of the house, which is not a big deal really. And you plug it in once a week and it's got 450 k's range, all that. Anyway, I sold it recently and sold it very successfully, money-wise. And I'm waiting on the small one, Tesla 3. My son drives a Jaguar I-Pace because he's convinced, or I've convinced him. That's a clever car. And my daughter has ordered the new Model 3, so have I. And we've both ordered one the same colour, and I said to her the other day, why do we really need two? She only lives half an hour away from my place, we can share one. So we're going to do that for a start. But I think I'll probably finish up having to have another one. So that's electric cars.
How are we going for time?
I mean, look, I'll ask a question, why did you go use these Zephyr engines when Holden's would have been a lot more plentiful?
Would have been a lot more what?
Why did you decide to use the Ford Zephyr engine in the Buckles when my guess would have been that Holden's might have been a more plentiful engine?
The simple answer is Holden wouldn't sell us parts, and Ford would. And we wanted a 6-cylinder,
Sure.
and I'm pretty pleased we did, because you could buy a very good cylinder head called a Raymond-made alloy head, and et cetera. So you know, there's no doubt Holden knew how to make motors too, but they wouldn't sell us the bits. So, you know.
Thank you.
I think there the Holden was only the old grey motor, and I think the Zephyr was a lot stronger motor. And as Bill said, they most probably didn't want to see Holden motors running around in, they thought was going to be another kit car, but there was plenty of cars around in those days, kit cars. But they didn't know they were going to be a factory-built, turnkey, drive out the door. And the first thing he did, he went and bought a Zephyr and pulled it apart and put it all in the first car. Used what he could. We've now dug up, we've got every bit of information, mostly in his handwriting, of how many nuts, bolts, pieces, where they got made, all that. We've got all that information. Back in when I bought mine in 64, I think it was, Brian Lawler, who had one at the time too, Brian went off and bought the moulds. But he asked 6 of us to throw in 25 quid each, which is nearly a week's wages, or close to it, I think, for a young kid. Anyhow, we all threw in 150 quid, we bought it. And the only thing is, they had to be out of the place by Christmas Eve. And the old yellow trailer, my first yellow trailer, which is in one of the photos there, I took off down there to King's Cross, traffic everywhere, and they were all drunk, just about, having their Christmas party. No one helped me to put them on. I had to drag all these moulds on by myself.
So where are they now?
Between Matraville and Gosford. Oh, sorry, Davistown. They're not in real good nick because they had all wooden frames and they're left outside for 30 years and all that, but they're good enough to repair and patch up a car. The last body was, the last time they built a lot of parts out of them would have been about 1980. One guy needed a lot of panels, so he came out pretty good. But if anyone had a smash now and needed a quarter panel, mate, I would let them take a mould off mine, a quick mould, as long as they painted it again, if the moulds weren't good enough to use.